Are teachers getting displaced? And if so, at what rate?
So that was the first time I noticed that, like, okay, here's this new technology that's coming into the classroom with a big promise of changing the way we teach that doesn't deliver. And I saw that over and over again. There are ways that education works that are not apparent to those that are outside the field. And people who are looking to develop products for education will do it much better if they have this understanding of how education works. And if I would say anything to the developers out there, the number one things that teachers could use are ways to get
homeworks. Are they still a thing? Is there still any point in giving homeworks to students? Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is Dr. Gregory Banks. Greg is a veteran educator and researcher with over 20 years of experience in pre-tertiary education. He joins us today to discuss the unignorable elephant in the room, artificial intelligence in education. We are going to be discussing everything, the good, the bad, and everything in between. You don't want to miss this episode. Hello, Greg. How are you today?
I'm very well, Newton. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to see you.
It's a pleasure having you on. Greg, for anyone watching or listening to this who might not be very familiar with you or the work you do, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I first got involved in teaching 20 years ago after I kind of stumbled onto teaching at first, and I found that I was really drawn to it because I wanted to make a positive contribution, and I found that teaching was something that I had some affinity for. I studied chemistry in my undergraduate education, and I really loved chemistry, and I loved being able to share that with kids. And I live in the Boston, Massachusetts area of the United States, and there was a great need for good science teachers in the Boston public school system. And so I felt like, hey, this is a way that I could make a contribution to society while doing something that I enjoyed and was passionate about. And so really jumped in and found very quickly that teaching is a bit more challenging than we all think before we start. But really just through trial and error, learned the craft. Went to a lot of classes, talked to a lot of teachers, and over the years, as we all do when we pursue a career over time, developed expertise and wanted to share some of that expertise with others outside of the education field who may be looking to develop products that are AI related for education, what we call in the United States K-12 education, which is roughly, say, 5 years old to about 18 pre-university.
Okay. And I saw you took your education or your study of chemistry far. You have a PhD in chemistry.
I do. Yes, I do. I guess I just love school and I must hate free time. I don't know what it is, but
why the pivot over to AI and maybe more technical side of STEM? I can understand chemistry is part of STEM, but it's not really what you would expect from an author of the book you wrote, which we are going to touch upon a little bit later. Why the pivot from chemistry all the way to AI and EdTech?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, before I started my PhD, I have master's in education and master's in environmental science. So I do love school. That was only halfway a joke. But the reason why I went for the PhD is it's a PhD in chemistry, but my concentration was in chemistry education. And so really what I studied both in my classes and in my own doctoral research was what makes for effective teachers.
Okay.
and specific science teachers, right? And so, the genesis of the book was that I was working on a research project. We're still involved in it, that was looking at how to help science teachers who are adopting a new curriculum learn that curriculum faster. And I was talking with one of the developers, brilliant guy, incredible coder, even has a STEM background himself. And I was talking about one of the things that's essential to how the classroom works. And it was something that if I had been having this conversation with some of my teacher colleagues, it wouldn't have been a surprise to any of them. It would have been like, oh, of course, yes, we know that. But to this developer, it was a revelation, and it really changed the way that he approached this particular aspect of the problem. And I don't think this is uncommon in other fields. I think you develop your expertise, then you don't always realize that those outside the field maybe don't have it. But what it underscored for me is that there are ways that education works that are not apparent to those that are outside the field. And people who are looking to develop products for education will do it much better if they have this understanding of how education works. So that was kind of the genesis of this book. But really what has been going on for most of the last 20 years is that, education is often a testing ground for all kinds of new tech developments. And I mentioned this in the book. I remember early in my career, I was given a set of these things called clickers. They look like remote controls for televisions. And this is going to sound very primitive, but it was advanced at the time, where students they would each get one of these clickers or remote, and you show a PowerPoint presentation and you put up a multiple choice question, and students could pick A, B, or C. And we were amazed. We were like, oh my goodness, this is going to change teaching. This is going to change the way the classroom works. And, I used them for months and was really excited. But soon found that, they really distract the students when you take them out, like the students play around with them. They take time to then put away afterward. And they didn't give me a lot of information that I couldn't get in another way, maybe using paper or using some other verbal response. And so that was the first time I noticed that, like, okay, here's this new technology that's coming into the classroom with a big promise of changing the way we teach that doesn't deliver. And I saw that over and over again. I saw it when the internet first started becoming big. I remember there was an administrator who came into my classroom and said, it was more so when smartphones came out, who said, now with smartphones, kids don't need to remember anything anymore. Which, I mean, it sounds funny to say that now, but it seemed like common sense at the time. Same thing with one-to-one laptops, where people were saying, well, once all of our students have a laptop, then we can automatically teach 21st century skills. And as I point out in the book, what we've been finding in the classroom is that when all students have a laptop and the laptop is open, they are not participating in the lesson because they're looking at social media, they're doing online shopping, they're playing games. And so more and more teachers are now moving away from using laptops in the classroom because there are so many distractions. And that's not to say that these technologies don't have their place and they're not useful. But what it does underscore is, without an understanding of how education works, technologies can just kind of be thrown in a way that isn't always effective. And I think because AI is very different, there's a potential with AI to really be transformative in a very positive way if developers understand what it is that education needs from technology, so that they can build products from the start that are more effective.
That makes complete sense. To clarify something though, you're teaching primarily, what subject did you, or do you still teach?
I don't teach. I moved into a bit of teaching and administration, and I'm not teaching at the moment. I am still doing research,
okay.
But I'm not teaching at the
okay,
moment.
But when you taught, was it like a
chemistry?
Chemistry. Oh, okay. And that was for K9 pre-tertiary students or pupils, right? All the way to
Yes,
18.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And in the United States, most of the time that is what we refer to as 10th and 11th grade. So 16, 17-year-old students.
Okay. Greg, I would like to set the stage properly for the viewers. You know, myself included, a lot of us, we are not very familiar with what happens on the other end, where a lot of these new EdTech solutions are being implemented and used in education. I, for instance, am way closer to the building of these AI solutions and EdTech platforms and the management of the whole platform. But we don't really know what's happening at the other end. We don't have a good feel of how that is shaping education. As someone who has been there, someone who has been in the classrooms, you have observed firsthand how gradually artificial intelligence solutions crept into education, began to shape the way education occurred, the way students were able to learn, the value of education, the value of remembering things. We would like to get your take. Just help us understand, how has it shaped education? What have you observed? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it like this huge tsunami that the media says we will experience at some point, where education would come and completely decimate what we currently understand as education, probably make teachers obsolete? You are in there, you've observed this within the past 5 years, I would say. Help us get a feel of this trend that's just taking shape.
Absolutely. And I want to start by saying, I think developers have a real tricky job in that they're creating products for other fields, and they're kind of expected to parachute into these fields that they haven't had a chance to develop expertise for, and create products as if they're insiders. And that's a really hard job. So I don't want to sound like I think the developers are doing a uniquely bad job of this. I think it's a difficult situation for them to be in, and it's understandable that without having that inside knowledge in any field, that there are going to be challenges. But and actually, kind of, you mentioned this in an earlier episode where you said there's a temptation to use AI to make the products that you can make using AI, and then hopefully to figure out that there's an application for it. And so my hope with this book is to be able to give people a little more of an inside edge, so that they can make choices that will make it so that what they're producing is that much more likely to be usable and therefore a viable product. But I'm sorry, I got off your question. The AI chatbots, when they first became available, let's say ChatGPT, they really did hit education like a storm. I remember my colleague who was in the English and history area, my administrative colleague, just really incredibly stressed out trying to come up with solutions to keep students from having ChatGPT write all of their papers, because there was virtually no way to tell. The only way to tell is if there was a student who was a mediocre writer and suddenly turned in a perfect paper, then maybe you were like, I wonder if they actually wrote this. And so I would say the first level of interaction that schools have had with AI is around prohibition. And by that I mean, how do we as schools keep students from using AI when they're not supposed to? How do we keep them from using it to write their papers? How do we keep them from using it to do their math homework? So that's the first approach. And the answer to that is that there isn't any way to keep them from doing that.
I was keen to ask and hear the answer to this question you just answered. So there really is no way, right, Greg? Because there are quite a lot of solutions coming up in the market today, trying to detect when a paper is written by artificial intelligence. But we haven't found, I don't know of anyone that works perfectly yet. No. That can take an AI written paper and translate that into a human style writing. I'm happy to hear that it's not, I mean, even in the education sector, you don't have like a tool that all teachers unanimously use every time they're marking papers, which is sad in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's too bad. It would make things easier. So that's kind of the first layer of this as it interacted with schools. And really the next layer of this is for some teachers to start to bring in AI, large language models, so AI related tools into their teaching. And in some cases to assume that students are going to be using AI tools and change their teaching accordingly. Now that would seem to be the best solution, right? Because we're all good. I use the AI tools every day, and I'm sure you do too. So why don't we just change how we teach, expecting that they're going to be using those tools? And there are some benefits to that, but there are some challenges. There are some things that those AI chatbots do well. So for example, if you've already written a paper, like a paper for your English class, submitting the paper to ChatGPT and saying, hey, can you give me feedback on this? Like that's a real educational experience. You can get a lot of valuable feedback from that. Or if you're in a coding class and your code isn't working, dropping the code into ChatGPT and finding out like, okay, what's the problem with my code? Super helpful use of it. But that's kind of like checking learning that's already happened. In terms of learning how to write or doing some of the more foundational learning exercises, there's not necessarily at this point a very clear role for things like ChatGPT to play. So I do think that eventually the only solution is going to be for teachers to adjust their practice so that anything that happens outside the classroom, they're assuming that kids are using an LLM. I think that's probably where it's going to go. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but that's going to take some time.
Yeah. And from the way you have just explained it, it seems like teachers are still in the process of adjusting to this change. I mean, the transition
they're
is
just
still ongoing.
They're freaking out. They're freaking out. Let's just say what's happening.
Trust me, almost every other day I come in contact with someone building the solutions, right?
Right.
It's a whole new thing for me to hear just how it's working in the education sector, in your section, and also in academia, where a lot of universities are popping up all over the place, online universities where people can sign up and go learn everything you could learn in universities today. So just reflecting on what you've just nicely explained, homeworks, are they still a thing? Is there still any point in giving homeworks to students?
Yes, and I could make an argument for it. I know there's arguments on both sides of that, but yes, there's still work expected of students that they do work for school outside of class.
I'm struggling to see a kind of a homework that could really benefit a student when they leave the classroom, that they cannot just accomplish with artificial intelligence in milliseconds.
Right.
I wish you were still teaching now. You could have given us an example of a homework you've given recently.
Oh no, sure, I can.
To see what works. Yeah,
I can. I was very recently in the classroom, so I can remember. So, in chemistry, the outcomes that we look for students to be able to not only know facts, but to be also be able to do things. Let's say if I say, okay, what's the formula for sodium carbonate? I'm not going to put you on the spot. Don't worry. What's the formula for sodium carbonate? Can you or another student write down the?
I know sodium is Na though.
So there you go. See, you remember that. You remember that.
Yeah. Sorry, you were onto something very interesting.
So, knowing and not only writing the formula, but finding out the molar mass and finding out like, okay, if you wanted 100,000 sodium carbonate formula units, what would the mass of that be? Well, in order to do that, you have to know the formula. You have to know how to use the periodic table. You have to know how to do mass to mole conversions. You also have to know how to use a balance in the lab. So there are skills that, number one, you need to have been exposed to, and you also need to practice them enough so that they're routine. And that just takes repetition. Just like learning any skill, there's just no way around that. And incidentally, I think there are places for AI to help with this. But there still is the practice of the human mind to be able to do it. Now, question that you might say is, well, why do they need to know how to do that? What if they could just pick up their phone and say, what's the answer to this? And that's an open question. I would say two things. Number one, maybe they don't. In the same way that we may hold off in learning how to use a slide rule or how to do long division because we can use a calculator. I may not memorize the formula for compound interest because I can go on Google and say, what would the total interest be if I deposit $10,000 at 5% over 40 years? However, there's also no getting around that. What gives smart people an advantage in life is that they know things and that their brains can use those things that they know to process faster than someone else can even come up with a question. And if you ask a question of Google, of any chatbot, and you don't have enough background knowledge to understand the answer, that answer is useless to you. Now, maybe you can ask some more questions to find out, but at root, you need to have enough knowledge to, number one, know the right question to ask, and number two, to understand the answer. So I don't think there's any getting around having to know things. And in order to know things, you just got to put in some work.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the homework question you just mentioned. I still think, AI of today, if that question is typed exactly as you just stated it should give the right answer. However, as you said, without probably contextual information about the result. But that again can be done. Prompting is just getting so advanced these days. The way you don't just ask these chatbots anything these days. You've got a whole prompt with different layers of answers. It gives a first answer, fits that into a second prompt, which fits that into a third. Before you know it, you get an elaborate answer with context and everything you need to fully understand it. So that question you just gave us an example, artificial intelligence can give that. So I was wondering if, as a student, if I come to school the next day with the answer, would you question me right there in front of my homework, or would you just take that and give me a 10 over 10?
So, what teachers are doing is they are more heavily weighting what students do in front of them. They don't assume that anything students come in with from the outside is something that they necessarily did. We like to trust students, but in terms of grades are complicated things. Grades mean different things to different people. But if what a teacher is asked to do is to rate the amount of knowledge that a student has in a particular area, really the only way that the teacher can be sure of what the student knows is if the teacher sees the student produce it. So I'm seeing a shift to more assessments happening during the school day. Yeah,
I can see that happening at scale, globally, very soon. Still in that same line of thought though, and I know this might be difficult questions. I'm not necessarily expecting you to speak for all the teachers in the world. I'm just trying to see how it works in the community you have been involved in. The other curiosity I have is, are teachers getting displaced? And if so, at what rate?
No, I haven't seen that, and I don't think it's going to happen.
No?
I don't. I think, and one of the things that I tried to emphasize in the book is what it is that teachers do with students that is unique. So, information is everywhere. I forget who said it, but there's that famous quote: "If information were all we need, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs." But of course we're not. The information's out there to do both of those things, but very few of us are. And kids are different than adults, in that if we were talking about would AI replace teachers for adults, I would say maybe. That's a possibility, because you look at adults do really well with remote learning, right? Online courses. Adults like that. They love the convenience. They're mature enough. They're able to get the information. They're able to advocate for themselves. They're not looking for the social aspect of the learning experience that kids are. However, what school does with kids is very different. And, if the only way that AI would replace teachers is if something else other than school replaced the social and emotional aspects of school, of nourishment and growth that school provides at the moment. So school could be substituted for something else, but something like it is going to be needed. So I don't see even a decrease in the number of teachers.
I can see the wheels are spinning as you're thinking about this, which is kind of how I expected it would be. On that side, it's news for everybody, even on the side of the producers and the managers of the production of these AI solutions, right? Mm-hmm. We are all just adjusting to what's going on. Regarding the impact on the teaching side, I struggle to see how this wouldn't result in a lot of teachers being forced to pivot or change their ways of teaching significantly. I think teaching is going to take a different shape. I just cannot project at the moment what that would look like. I doubt anyone can. Teachers should brace for something. If I'm being honest, Greg.
You're totally right.
There's no escaping what's coming. From the outside looking in, I would have thought, and I guess many watching this, we would have thought that AI is becoming a teacher for absolutely everybody, not just students, I don't see why teachers cannot also rely on AI. I mean, if you give a student a very simple arithmetic homework or something very simple, they go back home, they have access to this vast amount of information, to things that you could study at PhD level. They could come back with a very complicated answer. And as a teacher, you might have to resort to artificial intelligence to even understand what they have produced. So from the outside looking in, I would be thinking AI would come and be the overlord teacher, teaching everyone, students, teachers. Right. That would then mean teachers would have to transition into some form of coordinators, right? Using AI, of course, but just they'll be in the middle there trying to, match students to personalized education. If you ask me, that's what I think the near future would look like. I don't know. I don't know what you think about this opinion I have.
I think you're spot on that teachers are going to need to change. And I think, that's another reason why this moment is so important and for teachers and developers to really work together, because I think teachers recognize that the field will change because of AI, and teachers want to be relevant. They don't want to be laid off. They want, and genuinely they want to help their students better. So I think there's an openness there. So let me give you an example of why I say there won't be layoffs in teaching. So when MOOCs first came out, massive open online courses, right? The promise was that, hey, students can now go to school from the comfort of their own home. They can learn from the rock stars in the field. They can take courses with the best professors at MIT, and everybody gets to learn with the most amazing teachers everywhere. And we got to try that out during COVID. And I don't know, I know Europe had a bit of a different experience with school closure, but in the United States, we had schools closed for quite a bit. The school I was in, I taught during COVID. And I put it in air quotes because we did the best we could, but it was a disaster. Incredible amount of learning loss, huge negative social emotional impacts. Nobody anymore is talking about this idea of students going to school remotely. So why is that? If just having access to the information and the best information is going to make school the best, that's not what happened. So what do we take from that? Well, one of the lessons is that school is more than just shoving information at kids. There's a lot more that goes on. There's a lot of social interaction. This is where kids, you think about our evolution as a species, kids grow up through childhood and adolescence, and they learn to be adults by interacting with each other and with knowledgeable adults. And that has to happen somehow. And for most kids, there are some exceptions. For most kids, that happens in groups. That happens with other kids. That's where they find out who they are. That's where they find out what the values of the society are. That's where they find out what they're good at or what they're not good at. It's where they make friends. It's where they learn to communicate. And that's got to happen somewhere. And right now it happens in school for most of our societies. Could it happen somewhere else other than school? Could there be a dedicated new group that arises to fulfill this role? Yeah, that could happen. But something has to do it. And right now that's happening at school. And the reason why I don't think they'll be separated is that learning is such a personal thing. If I'm trying to learn something and I don't understand it, that impacts how I feel about myself. If I'm trying to get this calculus thing and I'm not getting it, I'm just like, ugh, I'm stupid. I'm so bad at math. And my relationship with my teacher has a huge impact, number one, on how I learn, but number two, on how I feel about myself. And number three, on how I interact with the rest of my peers. Who do I see myself as compared to my classmates? And all of this is happening in the classroom on so many levels at the same time. And that's why school itself can never be replaced. And that's why teachers can't be replaced, because there is no chatbot that can do that. And even if it could, kids don't care, because kids care about other humans. The AI is never going to nourish a kid in a way that a human can, because an AI can't authentically care about them. And so that's why I don't think that school is ever going away. And I don't think there's going to be any decrease in the number of teachers, because while AI tools can make teachers better and teachers need to learn how to use them to make them better, it can't substitute for teachers.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be great to have you back on the podcast in roughly 3-5 years from now.
Let's see, maybe I'm completely wrong.
Let's revisit this topic and just take stock then again.
Fair enough.
Greg, you worked on this. You actually recently led this interesting pilot study on exploring how AI can help teachers adopt science curricula more effectively in their daily activities. We'd be keen to just get an understanding of the key takeaways. What was the findings from this study, from this experiment? What was the main lesson that enriched society in any way?
Yeah, so there were, I think what would be most interesting and relevant for your listeners is that, so what we did in the study is we looked at teachers who were adopting this new science curriculum, and they went through a training that has the training that teachers have gone through for the last couple of years. It's a new curriculum. It's very hands-on. It's great. And the twist was that this company I was working with, Edo Learning, was developing a small language model. So just built on the data bank, the data for this curriculum, and built a model and a chatbot, let's say, where teachers could ask questions to help them adopt the curriculum faster.
When you say adopting a curriculum, what does that mean in layman terms?
So let's say in the previous school year, they were teaching using a particular textbook, and they would go through a particular sequence of units. Whereas in the next school year, they're teaching the same subject. Let's say it's sixth grade science or high school biology, but they're using this new curriculum, which it teaches a lot of the same ideas, but it does so very differently.
Okay.
So the teachers need to change what they do in their lessons. They need to change, in this case, they need to change very dramatically how they teach the students. They need to change the activities they do with the students. And all of this information is contained in this very big handbook called a curriculum guide. And so this handbook is kind of intimidating because it's so big and there's so much information it's literally like this big. So that the teachers need to figure out how to use this while they're teaching the course. So what we were doing with the intervention is that there was this tool that teachers could go on and say, for example, what are all of the materials that I need to teach Unit 1, Lesson 5 tomorrow? Or what concepts should my students have mastered by the end of the first half of Unit 3? So kind of like being able to sit with an expert in the curriculum and get some advice. So number one of the things that appears to be appearing is that teachers are really constrained by their prompts. So you mentioned earlier in our conversation about the importance of prompts. And if teachers don't know what this tool can do, or they don't know how to ask it, they're leaving a lot of information on the table. And, not surprisingly, you have the newer teachers who are brand new to the curriculum, who are asking looking for very basic information. What handouts do I need for the class tomorrow? Whereas teachers who have more experience are asking more conceptual questions. What should the students understand by the end of the second lesson? But really where the opportunities are, I think, for developers in this case is really coming up with a great training program for teachers on how to get the most out of these tools. How do you ask the right questions?
I think now it's a good time to jump into the book you wrote. The book is called Aligned, a love letter to developers on what we need from AI to improve education. At the core, what was the essence of this book? Why did you feel the need to write it?
It's a great question. It was a number of things. It was looking to help my fellow teacher colleagues. Despite the fears that we do here, I think most people are open to AI being a benefit. And I think teachers especially want to get in front of this, both for their students and for their own skills. I mean, you mentioned upskilling. I think teachers are aware that they need to learn how to use this in their teaching and to get ahead of it. And they're eager to do so. So I think there's a lot of goodwill on the side of teachers. And I also know that there's a lot of interest and ability on the side of developers to create products that will help education. Peter Drucker has a famous quote. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, teaching is one of the few occupations in which no tools exist to make an ordinary person capable of competence. It's notoriously difficult to produce a good teacher, or to have a person in a teaching role produce good results. It's just really difficult. And all of these tech innovations that have come up that we've discussed so far, I mentioned the clickers in the beginning, but the internet, one-to-one laptops, MOOCs, all of these technologies have come in with the promise of really giving teachers superpowers, and they've all fallen flat. They all have not led to this change. And teachers are probably the most disappointed of anyone, because there's nothing worse than feeling like, I'm trying to reach all of my students, trying to help all of my students, help them learn. And I see that I'm failing and I don't know how to do better. And now with AI, because of the particularities of this technology, it has the potential to close that gap and to make it possible for teachers to reach all of their students. But two things need to happen. Number one, developers who are creating products need to make the right products. And number two, we have to get it right maybe not the first time, but pretty quickly, because what ends up happening is if a technology is introduced into education and it doesn't seem to be useful, people close their mind to it. Oh, I've tried that, it doesn't work. Or, oh, it's not worth putting money into. So it really felt like the right time to put this book together. And it really is written for developers. I think teachers may find it interesting, but it's written for developers, and it's really written as a manual. And I actually include some build suggestions in there. And if I would say anything to the developers out there, the number one things that teachers could use are ways to get feedback on what their students have learned. I'll say more about this in a minute. And ways to create multiple versions of the documents they use. So let me touch on each one of those. For most classes, right, you teach a lesson. Very often, in good teaching, the teacher will, at the end of class, give students a question or two that tests whether the students have learned. So in my calcium carbonate example, maybe at the end of my lesson, or sodium carbonate, maybe at the end of my lesson, I'd say, okay, students, here's a question. Tell me how many grams of, mercuric chloride you would need to have 50,000 formula units of it. And so students would fill out their answer. Now, in a typical classroom, I would take those papers and I would look through them. And I would have to look through them quickly, and I would have some sense of what they learned and what they didn't learn. It's good. It's useful. But what would be really helpful is if there were a way to, let's say we scan those in and get a PDF, and if there were some LLM that could take them and say, here's what the class has learned. Here's where they're struggling. Here are the 3 students you need to make appointments with and have them come in for extra help tomorrow because they're totally not understanding it. Here are the 3 students who have totally got this down, and you need to come up with something that's more complicated for them tomorrow because they're going to be bored in class if you don't. So that's something that I think is very achievable and would be incredibly helpful. And teachers would be jumping up and down if they could get that. And the other one that I touched on there that I'll say more. So if I, as a teacher, am going into class the next day, I'll very often give them materials. We still use paper because laptops are too distracting. I'll come in and I will maybe have a set of activities I want my students to do, and I give them a handout with some questions on them or maybe some information as a way to focus them and as a way for them to kind of record the information in a way that's organized. However, for time's sake, I can really only make, let's say, one version of that, right? Because there's just not enough time to do more than that. However, all of my students are unique and they're different and they have different needs. One of the things that AI can do really well is it could make different iterations. So there's more to this kind of conversation, but if the tool had information about the students, it knew the students' strengths and their weaknesses, what they've done well on recently, what they haven't done well on, then I could take my handout for the next class, feed it in there and say, okay, give me a version that's specifically tuned for every student. And so for the student who typically struggles with, let's say, basic arithmetic, there could be extra arithmetic practice, or there could be a more clear breakdown of a particular operation that's being discussed. For the student who's further ahead, there could be more advanced problems. And so each student could get, you mentioned this earlier, each student could really get a very personalized interaction in a way that I, as the teacher, I just don't have time to do that. But that's something that AI could do.
Let's say, hypothetically, you find yourself in a room right now with all the developers of EdTech, education technology, and there is one thing you would want to tell them to stop doing or stop producing. What would that thing be?
First of all, I would thank them because they brought a lot of great tools to us. But to stop doing, don't get in the way of the teacher-student relationship. There isn't anything that AI can do to help with the teacher-student relationship. We're just not built that way. Maybe in a few thousand years, we will evolve and become different. But right now, humans just aren't built that way. And so don't do anything that's going to insert itself in between the teacher-student relationship.
Greg, I don't know, but it seems that cat is already out the bag a long time ago. I hate to break it to you, but this is what I genuinely feel. And yes, again, the argument you make, it's a very good one. However, I look at it more like an argument against things like, homeschooling, which has been going on for a long time, even before AI came into the picture. You've got the wealthiest, the top 5, let's say 2% of people in the world. Most of them, their kids are homeschooled, right? From when they were born all the way to, adolescence. They never leave the house. Learning without the community, right? Which you have just explained. That's already happening for the top 1% for the most part. So that even without AI coming to the picture, we have seen how that has played out.
Can I push back on that?
Please.
So what I would say to that is, if you look at the homeschooling world, I think what homeschooling represents is really an opting out of the public school system, especially in areas and with people who feel that the public school system has not respected their values or their choices or what they want their kids to learn. And what I have heard about what's going on in the homeschooling world, it's not an area I'm super familiar with, is that families that do that actually spend several days a week together. So what they're doing is they are coming together as groups of homeschooled people, and they're having group activities. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because young people need to be in groups, and they need to be in groups and learning things from knowledgeable adults, because that's how we're wired. So if you look at what homeschooling students are doing, that is what they're doing. Not all of them, but it is a thing.
So the community still exists, even though it's at a smaller scale. It's a
much smaller scale, yeah. And maybe things like that will replace school. That would absolutely not surprise me if it became something that was more informal like that. Like people got their learning from AI, and then they got this social connection from forming other groups. That would satisfy my criteria that I feel like I've seen as well.
The next question happens to be a tradition on this podcast. Can you share with us the biggest mistake you've made in your career journey so far? If there's anything like a biggest mistake, the most significant, most impactful that you don't mind sharing with us, what is that mistake and what was the lesson you learned from it?
Yeah, biggest mistake I made, and I'm working to rectify it now, is I don't think I appreciated the importance of networking in my career. So in teaching, and this may be true in other fields, I felt like, okay, if I focus on my craft and I make sure that I continually improve my skills, then my skills will do the networking for me. And so I really didn't put any effort into networking and getting to know people. And what I found was that when I was looking to advance, or even when I was just looking to change organizations, I had to do all of that networking starting from scratch. And it's that idea of digging your well before you're thirsty. And I feel like I've heard this anecdotally, in that people who are very skill-based in what they do can think, oh, networking isn't something that I need to worry about. But that's something that I feel like I learned the hard way, is that I really needed to devote time to networking. And I'm doing it a lot more now, but I think it had a very significant impact on my career.
If someone is looking to follow in your footsteps, is there like an advice, the most valuable piece of advice you received along the way that you would like to share?
So I read a book that I would love to recommend to your listeners. It's by Cal Newport. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. He's an MIT professor. And his argument is that the number one thing that is important to do to get out into the employment world, to have if not a secure job, because there's not a lot of security these days, but at least a marketable job, is to develop a rare and valuable skill. So, what that rare and valuable skill is going to vary probably over your lifetime, but really keeping your attention tuned to what is it that not a lot of people can do that I can learn to do well, and finding a way to create a niche for yourself. And I think Cal Newport says a lot more about that in his book. Again, it's so good they can't ignore you. And so that's advice that I would give, because the traditional career paths seem to be disappearing in terms of it's hard to see 10 years down the line, where should I go? So you really have to focus on how can I develop a rare and valuable skill that is in demand today, and go from there.
Greg, what is one thing that many watching this would probably not know about you?
That's a good question.
Doesn't have to be absolutely everybody, just many watching this wouldn't know. And it stays a secret. It just stays a secret between you, me, and the viewers.
A secret, just us and all the viewers. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, I'll say this. When you're a teacher, you kind of learn to be a bit of a TV show host. You're kind of like the host of the party that is your classroom. Growing up, I was a very shy kid, so really not outgoing at all. So I'd say that's something that people don't know about me. I really, my nature is very shy and introverted, and but I have this other part of me that I've developed through my work. That I'm able to turn on when it's times like this, where I get a chance to talk to interesting people like you. And I'd say that.
Final question. How do you think the EdTech field will look in 5 years? We're looking, I would maybe tailor that to your particular field, maybe teaching. How do you see teaching in the next 5 years?
Right. I see teaching in 5 years in the same way that, say, building cars in the 30s transformed in the, let's say, 60s and, maybe 70s and 80s to where, cars used to be built by hand, and now they're built by robots, guided by humans. And I think that we're still going to see teachers in charge of the teaching and learning in the classroom. But I think teachers are going to need to know how to use a suite of complex tools that are AI based. And so I think, the more that teachers embrace this and look to help guide its development to ways that are good for students, the better it's going to be for students. And the more that teachers can then help developers create products that are good for everybody.
Greg, for anyone looking, where can they find you online, and where can they get your book from?
I have a Substack, so you can find me there. It's also called Aligned. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, and the book's available on Amazon. There's also an audiobook version on Audible.
Thank you so much, Greg, for coming on the show. Thanks for being transparent and candid with your thoughts, even though some of them were still taking shape regarding the future, the trajectory of the space in general. I for one, I learned a lot. It's always refreshing to see things from the other side. Before we wrap this up, anything else you want to get out there, Greg, before we pull the curtains on this episode?
Well, I just want to thank you, Newton, for providing the service to the community and for getting the word out about all the things that you share on your podcast. I know it's really kind of expanded my view of what's out there in the field. So thank you for doing this. I appreciate that. And if there's ever anything I can do for you or for your listeners in the future, I'm always happy to do that. So I learned a lot from talking to you. You gave me a lot to think about, and you definitely influenced how I think about this issue. So I appreciate that.
And we'll be very happy to have you back sometime very soon to also discuss how things are taking shape in your neck of the woods. On that note, we bring this episode to an end. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes. Until the next one, cheers.